Chapter 2. The Culture. As I begin this chapter, let me start off by defining culture. Culture are the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. They are the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. I have noticed that what causes differences in countries is culture. I am talking about the ideas and their way of living. At one point, when we were constructing the Yada Marble Factory, I employed some Chinese nationals for about 5 months. Every day, they complained of something new. They always said, "Your work culture is different from ours." They always questioned why we chose to sleep, yet we were behind. No one seemed to understand what they were saying, but continued to dismiss at 4:30 p.m. Yet the Chinese still insisted on working. You've heard of several Western companies employing a predominantly Asian workforce. This is purely because of how willing they are to reach their end goal. This isn't to say that other people from other parts of the world aren't hardworking, but the Chinese are hardwired to achieve success. Being competitive and having a goal-oriented spirit is inherent to every Chinese person and is further installed at a very tender age. The proof lies in the fact that multitudes of their countrymen are employed in companies all over the world. They believe in hard work. What I also realized is the fact that when they were eating, they never ate from a table, but would eat whilst squatting or crouching. One could tell that what made them to squat was so they could eat quickly and rush back to work. It made them not to relax or delay in going back to work. The culture of working ensures that they can attain their target within the shortest time frame. When you go to China and they are constructing a building, they do 24-hour operations. That is the Chinese mood, and that is their culture. I remember when I was constructing the Yada Hotel, I did it in 4 months, and we were working for 24 hours. Those who visited us during construction would lament and say, "You are doing it the Chinese way. You have adopted the Chinese culture and you have the Chinese attitude of doing things." They were referring to the Chinese way of doing things. One of the days, as I was talking to Mr. Mwene, he said, "Prophet, whenever I visit a workplace, there is one thing that I take note of. The culture in an environment may not be a winning culture, or it may be a distraction to the goals that need to be attained. So what I do first is that I colonize the people with a winning culture." I developed interest in Mr. Mwene as he got deep into his explanations about the winning culture. He said to me, "I go very deep to ensure I colonize people because when people are colonized, their culture changes." He also said, "First of all, I look at the products, then I ask myself, what is it that I can customize? What is it that I can bring to the client and the client will love?" The first thing that I have realized is the issue of culture. As I continued to listen to him, he went further to explain that people believe in hiring and firing, but if you hire a person who is coming into a culture which is already wrong, his or her performance will be swallowed by the wrong culture. The person will have zeal, but if the culture is not addressed, surely they will be swallowed. After hearing that, I refreshed my memory on related issues that took place in PhD ministries. There was a time when I wanted to turn PhD ministries around, and I hired some people from Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, ZBC, whilst some were local lawyers. I asked them to revamp the systems. I wanted things that were clear, but they failed to penetrate. They failed to break through. Why? Simply because my people had a culture which I had imparted on them. I had taught them that there could never be any other reporting system. Hence, the team that I had hired failed. Hiring a person who comes to operate in such an environment finds it very difficult. They cannot go anywhere. As Mr. Mwene continued to explain, I realized that surely China has a culture, Zimbabwe has its own culture, South Africa has its culture, Zambia has a culture, and any other country in the world has their own as well. If the culture does not change, even if the president has the most brilliant ideas, it will not change because of the prevailing culture. There is need to change the old culture in the ruling party first, and then bring in a new one so that the brilliant ideas of the president's brilliant ideas can manifest fully. If the culture hasn't changed, then any idea, no matter how good, cannot and will not penetrate. What this entails is that even if you place an extremely good man, he will fail to execute his potential and thus fail. you end up judging him wrongly, simply because they are in a place where the culture has not changed. What has changed is the one who is leading, but the culture has remained the same. If the culture is not addressed, then we are going nowhere. As I continue to address this subject, I will specify clearly what I mean and address it fully. I am talking about attitude. The way people dress, walk, react to situations, and the way they react to time. All this is about culture. There are some wrong cultures which do not promote growth in any environment. If they are not attended to, then you are definitely going nowhere. Mr. Mwene went on to add that the most difficult place that I have worked in was the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. The people there have a culture of sleeping in the afternoon from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It is their lunch break. They actually go and sleep and call it a siesta. No matter what you want to do, you cannot meet deadlines because of such a culture. Mr. Mwene also said that during the first 3 months I was addressing that culture, I told them that they should not sleep for 2 hours and taught them that lunchtime was only an hour. To them, this was more like a violation of their rights. His narration reminded me of one person who went to DRC to evangelize and spread the gospel. The movement of the Holy Spirit was limited by their Rumba culture, that is, the way they sang and danced. He realized that in order to promote the movement of the Holy Spirit, he had to change the culture first. He was supposed to colonize them with a culture that promoted the movement of the Holy Spirit, because without that, they wanted to dance the whole day and throughout the night. I want to ask you this vital question. Which cultures are surrounding or blocking movement or growth within your company? A wrong culture defines the end result of any project. If your project is stagnant or on a certain level and not breaking into the next best level, it is a straight sign that the culture within has to change. There is a limitation that a culture brings. Hence, you need to bring in another attitude or mood into the environment. That is what I am defining as culture. If that is not addressed, it means that you get to a certain level and you hit a ceiling until you bring in something new. As I continue to explain in this book, we are doing 2 things here: deleting what is wrong and installing what is good at the same time. You have to have a double link. Delete what is wrong and install the good, because you cannot change a culture without installing another. It has to move hand in hand. As the CEO, the first thing that you must weed out is the wrong culture. I will address the aspect of ladder holders. These are the people who must move with your vision. If they are to support your vision, they must carry that good culture, which will support the vision. What I am talking about are simple things. You are trying to attain $1 billion, but your workers are knocking off at 4 p.m. because it is in their system. What you are supposed to do in this case is become a role model by addressing how they think, react, and their daily behavior. My CEO, if giving an organization bent on a wrong culture, you cannot take it anywhere. I have personally experienced it, and I assure you that you will not go anywhere. At one point in my life, God blessed me with a company called Takzim. I had reached what I thought was the ceiling, but I felt that the market was still open. The market wasn't saturated yet, but I could not penetrate the market further. What I then did was that I hired a gentleman called Ngoni. Ngoni came into Takzim in 2006. I said, Ngoni, this is Takzim for you. I want you to revamp it. I want you to change it. He tried, and within a month, the company literally moved slightly upwards. This shifted the financial horizon. Then after 2 months, Ngoni regressed. His sales went down to where we were before he landed in Takzim. I asked him what was wrong, but he could not pick out what had drained his energy. The vibe was gone. Both him and me could not decipher the cause until the day that I interacted with Mr. Mwene. It dawned on me afterwards that indeed Ngoni's efforts and mine were swept away by the culture which existed at that time. Ngoni came on board of a troubled ship, and unfortunately, he did not change the environment. He continued to operate in the same culture. Ngoni had no clue why I had brought him on board. The major reason behind his appointment was the fact that our sales were going down. His role was to revive the sales, but his sales did not improve significantly. He was swallowed by the prevailing culture. Truthfully speaking, culture swallows everyone. Before Britain colonized Zimbabwe in 1889, people did not dress the way they are dressing today. They colonized us and imparted their dressing on us. Before them, we were not talking the way we are talking now. They colonized us and gave us a language. They took over our way of thinking and gave us their way of thinking using their education system. As CEO, when you go to a new organization, the first and most important thing to do is to colonize their mind. It is your greatest advantage to quickly find a way of colonizing their mind. It will change their culture and environment. One way of attaining this is through competition and incentives. You have to try by all means to improve their mind. This is not an easy task at all. It is extremely difficult. If the prevailing culture is producing good results, then don't change it. The aspect is to have a winning culture, a well-oiled culture, a culture that is producing results. If you are the newly appointed CEO of a bank or organization, identify the culture that was left by your predecessor. I am talking about the type of dressing and how your personnel greet clients. You see, if you bring anyone who's really good but does not change the culture, they will end up acting like everyone else, thereby continue to erode the success of the company. I have personally experienced it in PhD ministries. I trained ushers successfully and then placed them among the bad people. Instead of them changing the environment, they also joined in with the bad ones and ended up being the same with the bad ones. Why? Simply because there was a culture of rudeness and arrogance which was planted over time, which we had failed to root out. What is needed is to weed out the old and bring in a new culture. And this cannot happen unless there is depth of wisdom that is implemented, because what brings change is a certain way of sliding in, which then forces the mind to adopt to a new culture. Remember, there is one thing that I want you to understand. If you think of floor polish in Zimbabwe, you will think of the Cobra brand. If you think of toothpaste, you will think of Colgate. If you are asked who went to the moon, you will first think of Neil Armstrong. If you think of the best basketballer, the person who comes to your mind is Michael Jordan. Just think of the best golfers, then Tiger Woods and Nick Price pop in your mind. There is one thing that I want you to understand, is the fact that the first impression is always deeper than the subsequent rest. Therefore, if a company, church or country was struck by a wrong culture, it is difficult to bring in a new culture. When the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe announced, Zimbabwe is open for business, soon after taking over the leadership of the country, it was a very powerful and meaningful statement which showed people, especially from across the borders, that the country was indeed open for business. I think it only worked for a few months. The question then becomes, why? He made the statement in a land that was having a continuous culture for 37 years, a culture of wrong administration, misrepresentation, among a host of other irregularities that can block investors from coming into the country. I think it will be fair to be firm on administration and the hospitality of the nation before inviting the international community to invest here. We have to create a ground that can give access and a culture that can receive anyone who intends on investing in the country. That is a very powerful statement and invitation. Zimbabwe is open for business. The man himself was announcing to the world, we are open for business, but the major question becomes whether the administration was ready or not. Was the environment ready? Were our airports ready? Was our country's hospitality team ready to treat investors well? Or all they wanted were bribes? People took advantage of this and demanded handouts and bribes in order to introduce others to the new president. Simply because it is in our Zimbabwean culture, that is what we do. This in itself can and will block the president's good intentions. Offside. Gaddafi. Libya died with Gaddafi. The people of Libya have never been worse off. One Muhammad, a 31-year-old Libyan, spoke words that largely resonated with the general feeling in his country. He said, I joined the revolution in the first days and fought against Gaddafi. Before 2011, I hated Gaddafi more than anyone. But now, life is much, much harder, and I have become his biggest fan. The country has seen a 5-fold increase in the cost of food, unpaid salaries for months, the rise of Islamic State terror, and worsening electricity blackouts. Nothing improved after Gaddafi, and the country sees it now. Mahmoud, another Libyan, added his own words of disappointment in the bitter fruits of the revolution. We have had 7 governments since 2011, and what have they achieved? The only thing we can see is new dustbins because one of the early governments installed these new large bins across Tripoli. We still point to them and laugh, saying it's the only achievement of the revolution. Gaddafi Part 2. I do not know how far true this is, but it is said that Gaddafi used to sell oil on behalf of the country and would distribute the proceeds equally among the whole nation. He seemed like a dictator until he was captured and killed on 20 October 2011. The whole nation then realized that he was a hero, as he was distributing proceeds from oil sales among them. When Gaddafi was ruling Libya, education was free among a lot of other benefits. He was taken out of a pit like a nobody and killed, but Libya is now regretting his death. The lesson I derived from his life is that the people you feed today can turn against you. They will only realize your importance when you are gone. Now they realize they need him, but sadly, he is already gone. Mohamed Magariaf, the current president, is failing to do half of what Gaddafi used to do in terms of providing for his nation and distributing the proceeds from the oil among the nation like Gaddafi used to. Well, some may say he was keeping the bigger chunk for himself, but I think at least he was distributing enough to make the life of Libyans easier and better. I believe every man has his weakness, but the fact that he would distribute the proceeds of oil to everyone was a sign of good leadership. The current leadership is failing and the masses are suffering. Whilst you are alive, of what value are you to the people around you? How to change a culture. What is the first step then? It is to change the culture and the attitude. Next question then becomes, how can this be done? This can be achieved by seriously planting words into the hearts of people. The words being that we are a different people. Until people know that we are indeed a different people, if there is no change of culture, then the new ideas will be swallowed by the existing culture. You have been given an opportunity, Honorable CEO. You have got the fire and the enthusiasm. You have got the vision and you want people to follow you. You want to become a model and a mentor to the followers so that you can motivate and multiply them. You are about to create leaders around you. The first thing that you must hit hard on and address is the culture. Yes, start by the simple things, then they can change. Make it known that it can be done. Of course, it is difficult for people to let go of what they are used to doing because old habits die hard. People can admire and follow whatever is easy. However, if it is something difficult, people will resist. Indeed, culture is a difficult issue. For example, if I may ask, why do many people prefer transacting in hard cash and not plastic money in a country like Zimbabwe? Here in Zimbabwe, people believe that if you have cash, you are powerful, and that has become a culture. Those with cash have priority tills in shops and around other service providers. However, if you go to the United Kingdom or any other developed country, they use plastic money. They swipe with their bank cards because their rates are low. However, in Zimbabwe, the mentality of holding cash, which is associated with power, is perpetuated by the high transaction charges associated within online payments and plastic money. As a result, much of the cash is in the hands of the public, thereby promoting a cash crisis. A crisis which has caused headaches to the leaders of the nation. That is the culture in Zimbabwe. Therefore, the cash crisis cannot be addressed until the prevailing culture is addressed. You address it by preaching. Remember, you address it by placing proper words into the minds of the people. If you don't address the culture of a nation, you cannot lead the people successfully. Right now, the culture in Zimbabwe states that whoever is on top is bad. Whoever is in power is a bad person. So in other words, if you don't address that culture and get into power, you will still be labeled as bad. Even if we were going to give the opposition party the power to rule Zimbabwe, I tell you, they will be criticized within a very short space of time. This is because it's a culture in Zimbabwe which makes us diminish anyone in power. We just don't appreciate them. It is not in us to celebrate winners. That's why when one travels across Zimbabwe, they will never see pictures of Peter Ndlovu, Benjani Mwaruwari, or other heroes in the history of Zimbabwe. We don't have a culture of celebrating the success of others. Whoever comes into power will not be celebrated. They are only celebrated before they get into power. Let's take a look at what the first president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, did when he came into power. He changed the culture. There was a continuous fighting between the black and white South Africans. How did he end this? He united them by changing their culture. He called South Africa the Rainbow Nation. He changed the apartheid mentality. This is why it was and is easy for Ramaphosa to rule South Africa. He came on board when the culture had been changed. If he had come before the culture was changed, he was going to rule the nation in chaos. You see, the first mandate of any leader coming into power is to change the culture and instill a culture that can listen and abide by the instructions. Impart a culture that will follow advice and help to shift the leadership to higher levels. So if you are going to become a leader, a CEO, or you are creating your own company, if you start with a wrong culture, you will never succeed. Culture needs to be addressed before you take your new steps. When Mr. Mwene was talking to me about culture, I could sense his emotions. He was literally shaking. You could tell that the words were coming from a seasoned person who had moved in over 16 huge organizations and a man who had learned from vast cultures. I kept listening as he was talking about culture. Remember, I took it as my theory and I told myself that I would implement it in my life. And this made me realize an area that I was lacking in. I was lacking in the potential to dominate and bring a new culture, an aspect of altars in which your altar reigns over other altars. I could see his passion. He was surely trying to tell me something. He was trying to tell me that, man of God, if culture is not addressed, nothing can change for the better. One must bring a culture that is not an ordinary culture, but a winning one that can bring motivation. A culture like the Chinese culture, which makes them to work 24 hours. Just like the American culture, which makes them think that they are the greatest in the whole of the world. No matter how bad they perform, they don't see themselves as inferior. How can Brazil rise? Brazil can rise if the president can take the culture of soccer and tell the nation that they are footballers. If this is implemented, then they can develop even their industrial side. They will rise to the top because if whoever is on top brings a new culture, it influences the followers. Here I am going to tackle some of the basic questions you should be asking yourselves as an organization. Are you carrying a winning culture, or what you have is disturbing people? This is one of the very basic things. I am talking about arrival, knockoff time, and commitment in changing levels. Are your workers upgrading themselves? Are they empowering themselves? I am referring to basic things like a simple smile. Those are the things that describe the culture of an organization. When a client walks in, what type of aura are they received in? What is your culture? How is it? If that is not addressed, it means you are going nowhere. You will go back to the same position that they were in before you came in. Being granted the opportunity to head an organization or nation requires you to change the culture, else you are doomed. You are going nowhere. Just like in business and everywhere else, culture dominates to the extent that if you don't understand it, you won't make it despite your huge intentions. Let me tell you another one of my short stories. I went to Swaziland, a nation deep-rooted in culture. They have their way of doing things that is significantly different from other nations. When it comes to business, they don't believe in starting big. They start by starting, no matter how small. Whereas me, as an individual, I want to start big and I want to do big. When I went there, I realized that unless I prove myself in the small, they will never believe me to do the huge things because it's their culture. They believe that whoever is good must prove themselves first with the tiny things before they expand. If you go to any nation or any new environment, you need to understand their culture first. If you don't satisfy the culture, you will not get the market. It's a simple equation. Satisfy the culture and get the market. Failure to satisfy the culture results in loss. If you want to bring a new culture to the market, you need to work very hard to convince the market fully and win their confidence. I realized that many countries have cultures that limit people from growing. One day, I was talking to Ziamu Jambo. I asked him about Kama Billiat. "Oh, that one is a champion. He's an amazing player," he complimented. He started explaining how Kama Billiat was when he got into Kaizer Chiefs. He said, when he came in, he was carrying the whole team on his shoulders. He would play more than anyone else, and you could see great zeal in his eyes. 3 to 4 games later, I saw Kama Billiat toning down. Though prior to that, the coach had been giving him praises. The coach believed in Kama Billiat and labeled him the best player ever. He believed he didn't deserve to play in Africa. Kama Billiat lost his vibe. I asked him why that had happened, and I could tell from his response that Kama was swallowed by the Kaizer Chiefs culture. Not everyone was pulling in the same direction. He was a brilliant player, but his effort was being swallowed by the culture of his team. Take a close look at some of the countries that have changed governors or the ministers of finance. When the governor of the Reserve Bank or Minister of Finance starts work, you can tell that he is packed with very good economic reforms, which can turn the national fiscus around. 1 month down the line, you wonder where that zeal and vibe the minister or governor had has vanished to. It simply means all was swallowed by a wrong culture. If culture is not addressed, it can swallow even the biggest champions. What I have realized on culture is this: if culture is wrong, then you will also attract the wrong people. For example, if your culture involves a disorganized structure, it means you will also attract disorganized people. For instance, in church, the caliber of people in attendance is attracted by the culture of the church. In business terms, if your culture is wrong, you only attract dishonest, naive, and desperate people. If people are naive and desperate, and they are coming to your organization, it means you do not have professional and calm people who can run with your vision. I will expand more on this in the next chapter. A winning culture can be implemented gradually, and you can achieve it. I am referring to a culture in which if you give people authority, they truly carry authority. The reporting system is clear. That is, people know who they report to and everyone knows their perimeter. The working hours and attitudes are very clear. People have to be clear on the do's and don'ts and have a culture of achieving the set goals. You are also creating an environment in which you appreciate everyone who has accomplished anything for you. In other words, you are creating a culture in which people are giving you value and you are also giving them value. A culture that wins is a culture that appreciates people when they have done good. There is room for learning. There are systems that allow development as well as systems that encourage people to do better. As Yada FC, we played a friendly match against a team from Ufakose and we won 6-0. We were playing against a very strong team which included some Premier League players. After the match, the other team coach offered to give me 2 of his children to train with us. After the realization of our seriousness, he was not asking for money like other teams would, but he had seen our culture and wanted his team members to develop. He is also a Premier League coach. A winning culture. A winning culture is a conducive environment. A winning culture is implemented by the CEO. It is an environment which promotes people to excel continuously. What is your culture? What have you created? What are people seeing? And how do they feel when they are at your workplace? We had a problem in PhD Ministries at some point. We created a losing culture, even though we were growing gradually. It made us to not reach the highest horizon, although the gift was there. We attracted naive people, people that were desperate, and people that were not ready. If at your workplace you have desperate people, then you are losers. You will not go anywhere. You need to attract people who are calm and ready to develop themselves and in turn develop the organization. Every winning culture has a reflection practice. This is whereby people sit down and analyze what they have done, where they have gone wrong, where they have gone, and what they have not achieved. This enables them to correct all the past mistakes in order to move forward. If you see your organization not reflecting or looking back at where you are failing, then you carry a losing culture. This is one of the reasons why you are failing. Change the culture of an organization to change its outcome. Offside. China. It is a fact that the education system in China is allowing the children to do wonders. It is also a fact that the British and Americans have also changed their education system in line with the future. However, The education system that was used during the colonization era is still in place in Africa. It is so saddening to note that nothing has been done to change this type of education, meaning we are still colonized and ancient. Conclusion on culture. It is imperative to know that as you strive to change a culture, there are ideas that must come to you. Changing culture is installing a totally new culture. The one that you are installing is a winning culture that will make the people winners. I remember looking into the eyes of Mr. Mwene when he said, "Whenever I go to a new organization, I make sure that I dominate by changing the culture. I actually install a winning culture. The culture makes the people feel that they are a powerful lot. A culture that motivates individuals to work. I actually place incentives to encourage people to adapt to the new culture. I stamp authority in order to bring a winning culture. Trust me, it is tough, but you're shifting people from what they were used to do." In the 5 M's, remember, I said you are a role model before you become their mentor. Don't try to change people's culture, yet yours is not even worth emulating. In order for people to adopt to your culture, your first moves must be very clear for them to comprehend and follow. As you do this, you motivate others to follow in your steps. It is obvious that people cannot change before you as the leader has changed. The do as I say and not as I do concept does not work in meaningful leadership. That's an art for managers, not leaders like you. They must do as you do. It is said that if you want to break the addiction of a cigarette smoker, you can do so by substituting the cigarette with a pencil. When the pencil touches their lips, they literally take it as a cigarette placed on their lips. So when I say substitute a culture by a culture, it means you are taking something that is bad and replacing it with something that is good, replacing death with life. Laziness is a culture. Being rude is a culture. Lack of productiveness and lack of strategy is a culture. Lack of self-empowerment is a culture. It is in their bones. It is in their spirit. That's who they are, so they don't push to become better. You need to lead people who are willing to empower themselves and willing to learn new ideas. In the end, you yield better results. I want to give you the new culture that you will introduce a name. You can call it the winning culture or the champion's culture. What name are you going to give to the new culture? What name are you going to be moving with? You must give your dream a name. If you give it a name, it becomes part of you. Offside. Theme park. After hearing of the Doma people and how distant they are from the social world and rarely get any visitors because of the terrible roads, my response to this was to construct a theme park, a major attraction that would bring in tourists from across the globe. The theme park would leave the government with no choice but to construct the road. As I conducted my research, I realized that a theme park would not be an answer to the tribe, but only would help the name at large. Do you know that Disneyland and Hollywood contributes to a great chunk of America's GDP? According to a recent report, the American film and TV industry accounted for supporting 2.1 million jobs and 400,000 local businesses across the country. It says that the industry continues to be a key driver of the U.S. economy, adding high-quality domestic jobs and paying out $49 billion to local businesses across the country. Theme Park 2. Disneyland is also a major contributor to the economy. An independent study concluded that Disneyland Resort generates $5.7 billion annually for the Southern California economy. It is one of my desires that our country develops such theme parks that generate much needed foreign currency, thereby boosting the economy. I started my own theme park and I call it Wallywood. It is my prayer that it flourishes. 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 Flourishes.